I'm very honored, and we are a studio extremely honored to be able to be present in this impressive lineup. As you said, I'm the F. These are the two H's, Thilo and Simon. We have a team of about 30 people working in an old ice cream factory in Basel in Switzerland. I'm going through a series of projects and talking about how we work and what has been important over the years. And you said that when we got together and thought about starting a studio together, we very consciously said we want to work through a production and develop our approach to architecture and design mainly through production. I think you said something similar this morning, and I could very much relate to that. We have a history with China because our first construction site happened to be in Tsinghua, in the Tsinghua Architecture Park. South of Shanghai. It's like a 6-hour drive and 2-hour drive from Hangzhou. And there was this interesting idea of creating a park with a series of young architects and artists. And we got invited, recommended by chance, because we were teaching with some people from Herzog-Darmstadt at the time, and so we had no idea about China, of course, we got there and we were extremely impressed by the whole transformation the country was going on, and we just had the idea that whatever we do, it's going to be some kind of one-to-one mock-up. So we had this naive idea of communicating a playground that was a program which was given to us. And so we somehow discovered that through the description of a geometrical, a very described approach, we could develop this idea of like an archaic digital architecture, which we had in mind, and we knew that we could do something which probably in a very labor-intensive way and in a very costly. In Switzerland, usually labor is unfortunately very expensive. We could do something quite complicated. And so we came up with this idea of what we called a Babylon, a baby dragon, in this kind of three-dimensional Swiss cheese inspired by the Chinese garden architecture, where children could climb through a 2-meter thick wall of concrete, because always where there's an opening, there's kind of an offset of the other side, so that children can climb through that. And that's then some of the images we got sent in the recent years. We have not been there in a long time. And then we started working on some projects, but unfortunately, this project got never finished. This was for a clubhouse and in Lijiang, in a beautiful city in the south, in the mountains. Or what Mark Lee this morning mentioned, this strange project of 100 different architects creating some kind of zoo of different houses in Inner Mongolia, where we proposed to build a house which could be seen who is the architect, because the roof would be kind of the name of our studio, HHF. Out of that, there were like a series. I think this was an extremely important moment also on a collaborative process, because we got to know a lot of interesting young architects. And one of the projects which actually had a direct relationship and which came out of that was this project called Ruta del Peregrino, which is in Mexico, because we got to know and became friends with a Mexican architect, Tatiana Bilbao. And she got invited by the tourism office and the government of the state of Jalisco in Mexico to develop a master plan for this pilgrimage path where people walk for about a week for like 120 kilometers. Millions of people walk this path during the Holy Week in spring. And so we got invited to contribute an outlook point in order to make it a more sustainable tourism and also offer the people who on an economical way tried to use that moment when groups of young people and older people walk this very long and not easy path and carry this Holy Maria from one end to the other. And then there was like a lot of very beautiful contributions, like this one from Tatiana Bilbao was kind of a open church, was almost like the starting point of the whole path. One by Gisgartenbein, also from Switzerland, another one from Tatiano. And there was this very simple infrastructure offered for people to sleep and put a mattress. There's Luis Aldrete, Mexican architect, or this beautiful space in the wood by Derek Dunkamp, which was this gigantic white circle of concrete. The open book of Elemental, Alejandro Ravena, in the mountains, where you would have a view. And our proposal, which was meant to be an outlook point, and also a little bit like we heard that this morning in your project, that you go up and you have a moment of quiet, and you actually have a moment where you have a circular view from where you come from. You go up, you 360 degrees. You once have a view where you come from and where you and how you continue. And influenced by this experience, how to work abroad, we again try to describe that in a geometrically extremely clear and all at the same time cartoony, almost naive way, that we had this idea of how people should build that. And in the Baby Dragon, we used like 11 different formworks to create this kind of complicated figure. Here we reduce it to one formwork, so that it's actually through the different circles, always the same formwork would create different kind of arches. And astonishingly enough, they built it more or less exactly how we imagined it's going to be built. And then that's the outcome, how it looked at the beginning. If not used during the week, during these days of pilgrimage, it's used by cows. That's what you see here. And then it's very clean at the beginning. And then while the people are there, it's taken over by the public, because it's a tradition that the people leave their name. They spray their family name, they engrave their family name, they show traces that they have been there. So it's becoming like a completely public infrastructure, and but this is getting erased every couple of years, so it's becoming more and more colorful. This is a short excerpt from a movie which we did with a Mexican filmmaker for the Architecture Biennale in Venice, where the filmmaker was actually traveling with a group of people for walking with the whole path for like a whole week. And so you see that this is still quite beginning. And in a way, we think it's unfortunate that they clean it, because we thought that at some point it's going to be completely sprayed and covered in color. But so that's the moment when you're on top. And now you see that people come, they can sit, they can rest for a second, have a look where they came from, and then after a moment again continue. So we have always been interested in this kind of sculptural and also pavilion approaches, because it allows you, of course, to reduce with almost a non-programmatic program to test some ideas, and maybe also to test ideas in a much quicker way, you know, and maybe in a less complex way. Not related, but still related somehow. Much more recent in Copenhagen. We got invited for a festival of design, which is called 3 Days of Design, to create a venue for talks a little bit similar to what we do here. And we invited, we did that in collaboration with Björk Ingels, and this was for the Swiss Embassy. And the Swiss Embassy was presenting design talks for a couple of days. And what we did was in kind of reference to Werner Ponton, the Danish designer, who spent a lot of his life and actually in our hometown in Basel, working for Vitra and trying to solve the problem of like the freestanding chair. And so what we proposed was this kind of series of garden furniture which could be put together in different ways to have a kind of a playful reference to Werner Ponton, at the same time being a venue where these talks could happen. And interesting enough, there could, in this quite small installation, 200 people could sit in the garden and have a sort of an interactive moment, because the pieces are so large that you always have to be 2 people to carry and to communicate and to talk each other. Another line of work which always has been interesting to us is like the reuse of ideas, or the reuse of standard, the idea of ready-mades. And when we got asked like a couple of years ago to do an art, a storage and a gallery for a contemporary art in upstate New York for an art collector, and then the gallery, which was an addition to an already existing house, and spread out with some art on this very beautiful property. The budget was extremely low, so we had like $300,000 for 400 square meters of secured space for art. And so we were actually coming up with this concept of kind of a no design work, because everything which we used was things you can order online. So there's like not one custom made element, and we used these elements which are usually used for agricultural or industrial purposes to do this kind of sculpture, which was sitting there on this beautiful hill. And we even asked the company to draw the drawings. So we didn't even do the drawings. So it's 3 different halls connected through a ramp with one entry point on the top part. And of course, it's kind of also like a reference to, we heard that Johnson Marglee started their work in Marfa, and this is kind of a reference also to Donald Judd. So there is this strange object which in an interesting way relates quite strongly to the surrounding, because though it only has 3 windows and openings to the north, you walk that hill up and down, and you're completely cut off from the outside, but you still feel the topography, and you still feel the environment and nature in a quite direct way. And then as an insulation, it got just wrapped in by this kind of bat insulation, which is slightly reflective and white, to create in the mid and the lower part. There's a big showroom. In the middle part, there's a small office and the showroom, and then in the upper part, there's a storage. So that this middle ramp is both like a showroom and kind of the infrastructural backspine of the project. In the same line of work, we collaborated with scenographers and urbanists from Paris called AWP on a park, on a competition which we won, which is outside of Paris, like at the end of the subway station in Poissy. which is close. This is the Villa-Savoie of Le Corbusier, which so it's just like on the opposite of Villa-Savoie. And influenced by this, for France standards, very rare informal weekend housing, which was built without permission into this lagune of the River Seine, we proposed like a series of almost like homeopathic infrastructures built again on like this ready-mades of different frames. And the brief asked for like an outlook point and some kind of interventions with very small budget to come up with some identical and strong iconic moments. And one of them was this observatory tower, which we proposed, which got built in this prefabricated steel elements, which almost like a Tetris were pulled and put together, and then ended up being this kind of strange object, almost like a snake. And because the relationship between scale, because it's such a vast area on one hand, and the budget of like 5 million for all the different project parts which we could do was quite extreme. So we had to come up with ideas to create something which is quite iconic and still has a relationship then to nature. And so you walk up that small tower, and it moves a little bit. And it took us quite long to figure out how to build it, and we even had to change the structural engineer. And only once the engineer figured out that every element which is part of the design has to be structurally used, so even the staircases, we could actually do it. At the same time, we got completely different task and invited to do like a small pavilion. But I mean, that's what I'm saying. This is like reusing ideas which are floating around also in the studio. So we did this out of a kind of a similar construction, which was like basically a music chamber and one balcony in addition to like a small house in Switzerland, which is a completely different task, but still it was quite closely related because we're working at in the same time. So we use similar ideas which transformed and inspired the project. And then back in the project in Paris, there was like a small, they called it Maison du Parc, which is like the house of the park, like a small museum, where they were interested in presenting local insects. And this was a similar approach, but this was built then in this quite very cheap prefab wood, which usually also are used for tennis and sports halls. And we try to create this kind of almost like insect moment of legs, where you feel like the animal, and this kind of Gaussian operation where you go from one space to the other. And at the same time, like always, this very strong relationship to nature with the glass behind the wood, so that depending on the angle you have from outside, the nature is actually reflecting or completely closed off. Somehow the reason which allowed us to start the studio was we could collaborate with like 2 older architects on a housing project in Switzerland. And in that project, which was mainly some family houses and some larger housing, we were mainly focusing as really young architects on the parking. And I think this parking experience and this had a strong impact on us, because we somehow realized the power of structure and the power also of infrastructure, because somehow this was almost like a little bit hidden from the whole project. There's quite long underground parking where we could work with this in situ and partially prefab concrete to create underground street with a light. And we got very much interested in this idea of like have a very iconic and very spatially defining structure. And then when we we did a competition for a fashion center in Berlin. Linton, I think we were driving by recently for this project. So there's this whole series of old buildings, which are a little bit actually like this building, which are used for showrooms. This is, for example, the showroom for Hugo Boss. And they did a competition where they wanted something in a way they already have. So that the buildings look quite similar. They have this kind of old structure, which then the different fashion brands use for presenting their work. And so we were testing what kind of industrial and structure could we come up with if it has to be extremely flexible, because it's going to be reused and in many different ways. At the same time, also quite recognizable. So how can you have something which is extremely space defining and extremely flexible at the same time? So we came up with this idea of this structure where basically what you see from outside is a structure, and on the inside it's the same. So you have these like two different curves, sine curves, which allow you. This is the ground floor plan with where you have this possibilities of installing all the different ducts and changing depending on the use. At the same time, we could use the concrete as exposed concrete to have these events on the ground floor and heat with the thermoactive building system and the water in the concrete the upper showrooms. So in the upper showrooms, it was completely flexible and the people could choose. This was, for example, Puma, where they could just choose how much space they want and change it. And so we basically just a core and shell building where we built the structure, the facade, and the only thing which we could actually design on the inside, very iconic staircase, which is connecting the different floors. And now whenever there is something, a movie or a TV series in Berlin about fashion, they somehow rebuild that in a more or less way, because these curves have become like the image of fashion industry in TV and in Germany, funny enough. Another topic which we have been very interested in a long time is like the depth of the porosity of buildings and what we call like soft space, the threshold between inside and outside, the space between controlled and uncontrolled. And that's a building we have been, or like a series of building we have been working on in a long time, like it took like 7 years, and it was 4 buildings. So in this extremely dense urban environment where we renovated some buildings and took out one which was in very bad shape and continued the facade of existing and new. So it became like a structure of new and old. And in the plan, so the gray is existing, the dark green is also existing, and the bright green is new. And we put in the former courtyard, we put a new staircase, which is combining that in a way so that you could combine new and old. And we could convince the client to have a quite rough, almost industrial-like expression where old and new is coming together, and allowing for building in different locations so that the people could choose where they want to put their bathrooms and how they want to do their interiors and where they want to put their kitchen. It was a complicated, long process. And this kind of facade, we also wanted to test it in a large scale. We did a housing project which was where 40 apartments, partially social housing, were built as prefab wood construction. And so only the cores, the black ones here, are the concrete staircases, And around that, there were a series of different size wood apartments built, where also you see that the wood partially is even structural. Some of them were double height and prefab and put on site. And in front of that, we put this filter of like a use of industrial elements of like these circles and semicircles, which were used as a as kind of a balcony inside outside, which should become and will become green. Or in a smaller case, a family who asked us to do a small single house, and we tried different kind of approaches, and we couldn't get it done financially. So we found a prefab housing builder, and who was ready to take and disassemble his the parts, and we developed like the most simple plan which you can do. So we basically took there was like a plan with one concrete staircase, and the rest is a wood construction, where the outer facade is kind of everything which doesn't have to be heated and protected was in this intermediate space. Like this, we could afford to come up with something very cost effective, at the same time slightly different from what they this prefab house would usually look like. That's how it looks today, and more or less being taken over. One of the big topics in the city where I'm coming from is the city in huge transformation. It's a city which is Basel, which is built on the border and on top of the border of 3 different countries. It's on partially in Germany, it's partially in France, and the most part is in Switzerland. And the vacancy of housing is usually almost with zero. So there's a very, very high demand for housing. At the same time, there was a referendum, and the people publicly elected that the government is not allowed to sell any land anymore. And because of the industrial transformation and a lot of headquarters and a lot of areas of like former pharmaceutical and other type of infrastructural use, there's a huge transformation, and a lot of areas are being transformed into new cities and new housing within the city center. So, I mean, for a small mid-sized city in Europe, this is like a huge transformation. And usually in Europe, at least in Switzerland and Germany, there was a long, people were afraid of high rise, you know. So densification was agreed, people agreed that densification is needed, but for a long time, there was a long pushback against high rise. So there were different kind of now strategies to densify. And one of them, a project which we worked on, was actually built into this urban block of the 19th century urban block, where a foundation asked us to think about what could be done with a parking lot which was built into this urban block. And when we were working on that, we realized that there are some square meters which actually are unused. And when we work on that, we realized, oh, this is actually something which is also happening on other sides. So we negotiated for a long time that other people would participate, and that we could create a new parcel and to create housing which was built in the second layer into this courtyard. And to test, could you have kind of a family housing in this extremely dense environment, where you have firewalls, sometimes like up to 1.50 meters close to your future living room. And so we proposed this kind of cross plan, which then gets, this is the entry part, which then gets, the more you go up, it gets smaller and smaller, and it creates this very large balconies and terraces, which are green, almost like single family houses, almost like gardens. So that it's this kind of oversized, but very well-fitting, complicated Tetris figure in that backyard, where this used to be, that's the parking. So this used to be all concrete and closed, and now suddenly like people are living there and have even direct sunlight, although they have like 2- and 3-story high walls around the building, and it needed this kind of complicated sections to actually to be able to make it livable. And from outside the block, sometimes now you have like 2 public entrances where you see that, and if you entered there, then you're almost in this sort of garden situation, where we also work with a landscape architect and to make this landscape in a way, like the space really in front of the house, where you see that family are eating outside now in this very dense environment. And I think this, I'm ending now with the last project, a large competition which we did in France, which we did together with a French colleague, where I'm also teaching with. He's called Dominique Coulon, fantastic architect, and Totania Bilbao. So we did it, the urban project, we did it, and the competition we did three together. And the situation is very similar to what I just showed you in Basel. It's that's the city of Strasbourg, which is also on the same river on the Rhine, but a little bit more north. And this is Germany, and this whole area, the port, is being highly densified. With many different projects. Some of them are reused, and some of them were, it was so poisoned that you could not reuse it. So you had actually to build new. But this is kind of the environment. And because the demand also for housing and for future and other kind of use is so high, you see the density they ask for is extremely high. So we tested many different iterations. What could we come up with? And this is the model which then eventually we proposed, where we had the idea of a plan, or like an urbanism which was very open to the south, so that the sun could actually come in from south, but also to create this kind of city block, because we knew that it was the first cornerstone of this new quarter. And it's always extremely difficult if you have to start from kind of a tabula rasa situation. You know, how to create, you know, in this scale, some kind of heterogeneity. And so we were interested in this kind of moments of density, of like almost uncontrolled moment where like bigness, you know, becomes like its own topic. And at the same time, because we did the competition pre-COVID, and this was the brief. So there was it was a little bit more office than housing. But of course, and we couldn't know that COVID is going to happen. But still, we somehow knew that it's so large that we have to come up with a flexible scheme on the construction level, but also on the level of the urbanistic plan. So we tested already there different iterations, and we posed a structure which could be both, which could be housing, and we actually drew the whole project twice. So we drew and we showed it how it would work as housing and how it could be used as office. And reality then somehow proved us right, because now some of these buildings were designed as offices are now becoming, already now during construction, something else. Some of them housing, some of them, for example, a school. So we tried to come up with a whole system how to do that. On the other end, the question of heterogeneity, you know, in a scale like that, how do you grade that? And already Aldo Rossi, he tried that, of course, with like different colors, but also with different, even like architectures. And in another project, we tried that in a very subtle way, just with in a housing project with a series of colors and these slightly industrial oversized windows. And we thought, okay, this is kind of interesting. It actually works quite well. And just very few subtle moments, and also like for the housing entrance. So in this project, we try to combine the ideas I just showed you in the courtyard, this kind of architectural topography, and this idea of different colors. And because the city, because it was port, we had to work with bricks. So we tried to come up with a system of bricks and a system of extremely simplified design means, so that you could almost do the urbanism basically with bricks, and then you put them into relation to different colors. At the same time, extremely reduced means, because we knew that it's going to be very tough, also with reduced costs, so that we basically worked in per building with one type of window, and we just changed the color, so that there is this idea to somehow break it down in different almost like units, and to work with scale. I mean, this is like 2 weeks ago, this is like basically under construction. If it will work, this is a test, it's an open question. It's a very enormous scale. And so we tried to reduce it to the question of, how you can create this kind of identity also with color. At the same time, it's quite a complicated section, where all the roofs and basically all apartments have a connection to the river and to the outside. And so people are just like, in one part is still in construction, other parts are still being built, and other parts are people are moving in. So one part has private terraces, and other are shared and public terraces, and in the middle there's kind of a public infrastructure where you can bike through the whole part. And so you have these moments where the surrounding is extremely present. And yeah, that's so it's competition. And now the next project is going to happen. This is actually by Office Kirsten Geers, David von Seewen. We're doing the next step, and we are now finishing, and there are like two buildings missing, and we're curious, but it's interesting to work in that scale. That's it. I have like 2 minutes left, so.